The damp cobblestones of London offered little comfort to a fugitive. Lady Cecily had sacrificed everything, her velvet gowns, her family crest, her very name, scrubbing floors to escape a monstrous betrothal. She thought her disguise was flawless. She was wrong. The devil of Westmoreland had been watching her all along. The lye soap burned. It was a raw, stinging sensation that ate away at the top layer of skin, turning what were once the softest hands in Grosvenor Square into cracked, bleeding testaments to manual labor. Kneeling on the cold flagstones of the scullery kitchen, the girl known only as Jane scrubbed the grease from a cast-iron skillet, her breath pluming in the damp, freezing air of the underground servants' quarters. Just 3 weeks ago she had been Lady Cecily Harrington, the only daughter of the Earl of Pembroke. She had worn silk spun in Paris, drank Darjeeling tea from delicate Wedgwood china, and danced under the glittering chandeliers of the royal court. Now she wore a coarse, shapeless grey woolen dress, a rough linen apron stained with soot, and a mob cap that hid her crowning glory, her long auburn hair, which she had ruthlessly hacked off with a pair of rusty dressmaking shears the night she fled. She plunged her aching hands back into the scalding water, closing her eyes as a tremor racked her slight frame. The physical pain, however brutal, was a welcome distraction from the paralyzing terror that still haunted her dreams. Her father, a man whose love for the baccarat tables far exceeded his love for his daughter, had bankrupted the Harrington estate. In his desperate bid to avoid debtor's prison, he had sold her. There was no other word for it. He had signed a marriage contract with Baron Reginald Croft, a man 20 years Cecily's senior. Croft was a notorious brute with a vicious temper, whose first 2 wives had died under circumstances the high society of London politely chose to ignore. Cecily had seen the madness in Croft's dark, flat eyes. She had seen the bruising grip of his hands when he cornered her in the conservatory, whispering vile promises of how he would break her spirit once they were wed. Faced with a lifetime of torture, Cecily had chosen oblivion. On the night of October 14th, beneath the cover of a torrential autumn storm, she had packed a single carpetbag. She left behind her ancestral jewels, taking only a few silver coins and a plain gold locket that had belonged to her mother. She had slipped out the servants' entrance, disappearing into the labyrinthine alleys of London, before securing a third-class train ticket to the bleak, wind-swept moors of Yorkshire. Now she was buried deep within the bowels of Highcliffe Manor, the sprawling, intimidating country estate of Alistair Cavendish, the Duke of Westmoreland. Highcliffe was less a home and more a fortress, built of dark grey stone that seemed to absorb the meagre sunlight. It was a place of strict rules and suffocating silence. The housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, was a tyrant, with a ring of iron keys and an eye that missed nothing. When Cecily, calling herself Jane, an orphan from the London slums, had appeared at the back door, shivering and begging for work, Mrs. Higgins had sneered at her delicate features, but hired her nonetheless. They were short on scullery maids, a position so grueling most girls quit within a month. Cecily did not quit. She could not. Survival was her only option. For 3 weeks, she had successfully maintained her charade. She masked her educated, refined accent with a clipped, quiet mumble. She kept her head bowed, her shoulders hunched, making herself as invisible as the dust she swept. Yet there was one presence in the house that terrified her even more than the memory of Baron Croft. Alistair Cavendish. The Duke of Westmoreland rarely ventured into the servants' corridors, but his shadow stretched over every inch of the estate. He was known in Parliament as the Ice Duke, a brilliantly ruthless politician and industrialist who dismantled his rivals with cold, terrifying precision. He was 32, unmarried, and famously unforgiving. The servants whispered that he had no heart, only a ledger of debts and favours. Cecily had seen him only once from a distance, while she was carrying a heavy scuttle of coal across the main courtyard. He had been dismounting his massive black stallion. He was tall, powerfully built, dressed in impeccable riding leathers. His face was a study in aristocratic arrogance, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and piercing storm-grey eyes that seemed to cut right through the physical world. For a fleeting second, as she had stumbled under the weight of the coal, those grey eyes had snapped toward her. Cecily had frozen her heart, hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. But then the Duke had simply handed his reins to a stable boy and turned away. She had exhaled, believing herself safe. She was just another dirty, faceless servant. She was no one. What Lady Cecily Harrington did not know was that Alistair Cavendish possessed a photographic memory, an unparalleled network of spies, and a very specific interest in the Harrington family. She did not know that the Duke despised Baron Croft, a man who had double-crossed Alistair in a railway venture 2 years prior, and most importantly, she did not know that the Duke of Westmoreland had a portrait of the Earl of Pembroke's beautiful daughter locked in the bottom drawer of his mahogany desk. By her 5th week at Highcliffe Manor, the brutal routine of the scullery had become second nature to Cecily. The blisters on her hands had turned to calluses. She had learned to sleep through the biting cold of the attic, wrapped in a thin wool blanket. She was invisible. She was safe, or so she believed, until the morning Mrs. Higgins marched into the kitchen, her expression pinched tighter than a corset string. "Jane!" The housekeeper barked the sharp sound, silencing the clatter of pots and pans. "Wash your face. Scrub the soot from your nails. You are being moved upstairs." Cecily's heart plummeted into her stomach. "Upstairs, ma'am," she whispered, forcing a coarse, uneducated inflection into her voice. "I ain't suited for upstairs. It is not my decision, girl," Mrs. Higgins snapped, clearly displeased. "His Grace's personal study maid has been dismissed for clumsiness. Mr. Bates, the butler, received direct orders this morning. You are to take over the cleaning of the Duke's library and private study." Panic, cold and sharp, seized Cecily. The scullery was safe because it was dark and chaotic. The upstairs, the domain of the Duke, was bright, quiet, and intimately exposed. "Please, ma'am, I'm clumsy too. I'd surely break something." "You will do as you are told, or you will be thrown back out onto the moors without a reference," Mrs. Higgins interrupted, pointing a rigid finger. "Clean yourself up. You begin within the hour." An hour later, Cecily stood trembling before the towering double doors of the Duke's library, wearing a freshly starched black uniform and a crisp white apron. The heavy oak doors gave way to a room that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling shelves housed thousands of leather-bound volumes. The scent of old paper beeswax and rich tobacco filled the air, a scent that achingly reminded her of her grandfather's study in London. For a moment, she forgot she was Jane. She forgot the soot and the fear. Drawn by an invisible magnet, she stepped toward a desk covered in scattered papers and open books. Her eyes fell upon an open volume. It was a collection of French poetry by Charles Baudelaire. Without thinking, her lips moved silently, translating the elegant, melancholic French prose. Her fingers, though red and calloused, brushed the edge of the fine parchment with practiced reverence. "Do you find the translation accurate?" The voice was low-smooth and laced with absolute authority. Cecily gasped, spinning around so quickly she nearly tripped over the hem of her skirt. Alistair Cavendish stood in the doorway. He was dressed flawlessly, in a dark, navy-tailored suit, his cravat tied with mathematical precision. He stepped into the room, closing the heavy doors behind him, with a quiet, definitive click. I beg your pardon, Your Grace," Cecily stammered, dropping into a deep, desperate curtsy, her eyes fixed on his polished leather shoes. "I don't know what you mean. I can't read, sir." "Is that so?" Alistair walked slowly toward the desk. His gait was predatory, completely silent on the thick Persian rug. Fascinating. A scullery maid who cannot read, yet who holds a book of advanced French literature with the exact grip taught by the Swiss governesses of the London elite. Cecily's blood ran cold. She kept her head bowed. "I was just dusting your grace. It's a pretty book." Alistair stopped just inches from her. She could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the faint, intoxicating scent of sandalwood and rain that clung to his clothes. "Look at me, Jane." It was a command, not a request. Slowly terrified, Cecily lifted her chin. His storm-grey eyes locked onto hers. They were terrifyingly intelligent, stripping away her rough woolen dress, her chopped hair, and her smudged cheeks. He was dissecting her soul. "You missed a spot," he murmured, his voice dropping an octave. He reached out his bare, aristocratic fingers, brushing against her jawline. The touch sent a violent jolt of electricity through her entire body. His thumb swiped a smudge of soot from her cheek, revealing the pale, flawless porcelain skin beneath. "Get to work," he commanded softly, stepping back and breaking the spell. For the next 2 weeks, Cecily lived in a state of excruciating tension. She cleaned the library daily, and the Duke was almost always there. He did not dismiss her while he worked. Instead, he engaged in a terrifying psychological game. He would deliberately leave a ledger written in Latin on his desk, then ask her to hand him the book concerning Roman agricultural laws. When she instinctively reached for the correct text, she would freeze, realizing her mistake, and grab a random novel instead. He would merely watch her with a faint, knowing smirk. He noted how she walked, gliding across the floor, rather than stomping like a common laborer. He noted how she poured his tea, turning the spout perfectly to avoid drips of skill drilled into highborn ladies. Every interaction was a trap, and Cecily was exhausting herself trying not to spring them. She knew he suspected something, but she never imagined he knew exactly who she was. The illusion shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. A heavy torrential downpour lashed against the tall windows of Highcliffe Manor. Cecily was tending to the fire in the Duke's study when the heavy doors opened. Mr. Bates, the butler, stepped in, his expression tight. "Your Grace," Bates announced. "A guest has arrived unexpectedly. He seeks shelter from the storm and insists he has urgent business regarding the railway consortium." Alistair did not look up from his papers. "Who?" "Baron Reginald Croft, Your Grace." The silver fire tongs slipped from Cecily's hands, clattering violently against the stone hearth. The sound echoed through the quiet room like a gunshot. Cecily collapsed to her knees on the rug, her vision swimming, the blood roaring in her ears. Croft. He was here. He had found her. The monster who had purchased her life was standing in the grand foyer of this very house. "Jane." Alistair's voice was sharp, cutting through her rising panic. She looked up, her face drained of all color, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it made her shake uncontrollably. Alistair stared at her. The amusement, the calculating coldness that usually resided in his eyes, vanished. It was replaced by something dark, feral, and deeply protective. He saw the sheer, unadulterated fear in her expression. "Bates." Alistair said, his gaze never leaving Cecily. "Show the Baron into the drawing room. Have a tea service prepared. And Jane." Cecily choked back a sob, waiting for him to order her to serve it, waiting for him to hand her over to her executioner. "Jane will serve the tea." Alistair finished, his voice like cracking ice. "Your Grace, please." Cecily whispered, the aristocratic mask completely falling away. It was the voice of Lady Cecily pleading for her life. "Please do not make me go in there." Alistair stood from his desk, walking over to where she knelt. He crouched down, bringing his face level with hers. For the first time, there was no mockery in his expression. "You will go in there." he said quietly, his tone absolute. You will keep your head down. You will pour the tea, and you will not say a word. He will kill me. She breathed, a tear slipping down her cheek, washing away a streak of dirt. Alistair reached out his hand, wrapping gently but firmly around her shaking wrist. No one dies in my house, the Duke of Westmoreland whispered. He leaned in closer, his breath ghosting across her ear, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. Trust me, Lady Cecily. The world stopped spinning. Cecily stared at him, her heart stopping in her chest. He knew. He had known the entire time. Before she could process the magnitude of his words, Alistair stood up, straightening his cuffs. Now, dry your tears, put on your cap, and pour the tea. Let us see if the Baron recognizes his runaway bride. The silver tea service rattled against the polished mahogany tray, betraying the violent tremors racking Cecily's hands. She stood outside the drawing-room doors, the heavy oak panels, acting as the only barrier between her and the monster who owned her future. The storm raged outside, throwing jagged shadows across the corridor, but the true nightmare waited within. She took a ragged breath, the scent of rain and damp stone filling her lungs. Trust me, Lady Cecily. The Duke of Westmoreland's words echoed in her mind, a chaotic blend of salvation and doom. He knew her secret. He held her life in his impeccably manicured hands. Pushing the doors open with her shoulder, she stepped into the lion's den. The drawing room was a masterpiece of Victorian intimidation, draped in heavy burgundy velvet and dominated by a roaring fireplace. Standing by the hearth, warming his thick, beefy hands, was Baron Reginald Croft. He was exactly as terrifying as she remembered, a hulking figure with a florid complexion, sparse, greasy hair, and cruel, small eyes that missed nothing. He smelled of cheap brandy, wet wool, and stale cigar smoke, a repulsive stench that instantly transported Cecily back to the suffocating conservatory in London. Sitting opposite him, lounging in a winged leather armchair with an air of lethal relaxation, was Alistair Cavendish. Ah, the tea. Alistair drawled, his voice a smooth, icy contrast to the crackling fire. Bring it here, Jane, and do try not to spill it on the Baron's boots. I imagine they were quite expensive before the mud ruined them. Croft scoffed, turning his back to the fire. Mud is the least of my concerns, Westmoreland. The roads in Yorkshire are an absolute disgrace. If our railway consortium finalizes the Northern Line expansion, we can bypass these wretched carriage trails entirely. The investors at Lombard Street are anxious for your signature. Cecily approached the low table between them, her head bowed so low her chin rested against her collarbone. She kept her eyes fixed firmly on the intricate patterns of the Persian rug. Every muscle in her body was coiled tight, anticipating the moment Croft would recognize the auburn roots showing beneath her mob cap, or the delicate structure of her cheekbones. Lombard Street is always anxious. Reginald, Alistair replied, steepling his long fingers together. But you did not ride through a torrential downpour merely to discuss the Northern Line. You are bleeding capital. Your ventures in the East India Company have collapsed, and I am told your creditors are circling your London townhouse. Croft's face darkened to an ugly shade of purple. He took a heavy step toward the table, just as Cecily lifted the silver teapot. My financial affairs are perfectly manageable. It is merely a temporary liquidity issue, one that will be entirely resolved once I locate my misplaced property. Cecily's hand froze. A single drop of scalding tea splashed onto the saucer. Misplaced property. Alistair prompted his storm-grey eyes, locking onto Cecily's trembling hands for a fraction of a second before returning to Croft. Have you lost a prized hunting hound, Baron? Something far more troublesome. Croft sneered, reaching down to abruptly snatch a sugar cube from the bowl. His thick fingers brushed against Cecily's knuckles. She recoiled instantly, biting the inside of her cheek to stifle a gasp. Croft paused, looking down at the hunched servant girl, his brow furrowed. A runaway bride, Lady Cecily Harrington. Her foolish father, the Earl of Pembroke, signed her over to me to clear his gambling debts. The little wretch fled into the night weeks ago. Cecily poured the tea into Croft's cup, her vision blurring with unshed tears of sheer terror. He was so close she could hear his raspy breathing. "A pity," Alistair said flatly, "though I cannot say I blame her. Your reputation with wives is historically unfortunate." Croft's head snapped up, his attention violently diverted from the maid. "Mind your tongue, Westmoreland. I am here to offer you a highly lucrative stake in the consortium, but I will not be insulted." "You are not here to offer me anything, Reginald," Alistair corrected his voice, dropping to a dangerous silken whisper. He leaned forward, the casual lounging replaced by the posture of a predator preparing to strike. "You are here to beg." "Beg!" Croft spat, stepping back, his chest puffing out in outrage. "You arrogant bastard! I have the backing of the Rothschild banking network." "You had the backing of the Rothschilds," Alistair corrected smoothly. He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a thick stack of folded vellum papers, tossing them onto the low table beside the tea tray. "Until I bought out your debts yesterday morning. I hold your promissory notes, Croft. Every single one of them. The mortgages on your country estate, the liens on your London townhouse, and the outstanding loans for your failed shipping ventures." Croft stared at the papers as if they were venomous snakes. The colour drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. "That is impossible. You would need a fortune." "I have a fortune," Alistair replied coldly. "You, however, have nothing. You are entirely ruined. By tomorrow morning, the bailiffs will strip your home bare. You will be sent to the Fleet Debtors' Prison, where I assure you a man of your delicate constitution will not survive the winter." Cecily stood frozen, the silver tray pressed against her chest like a shield. She watched in absolute shock as the terrifying Baron Croft, the monster who had haunted her every waking moment, was dismantled with a few pieces of paper and a calm, ruthless tone. "Why?" Croft gasped, his voice trembling with genuine fear. "Why would you do this? The railway dispute was 2 years ago. I compensated you for the breach of contract." "This has absolutely nothing to do with the railway," Alistair said, standing up. He towered over Croft, his broad shoulders blocking the firelight, casting the Baron in a long, dark shadow. "It has to do with the Earl of Pembroke's debts. Debts that you exploited. You attempted to purchase a woman who did not belong to you." Croft's eyes darted frantically around the room, eventually landing on the trembling maid in the corner. For a terrible, suffocating moment, the realization dawned on his face. He stared at Cecily, truly looking at her for the first time. He saw the pale, aristocratic skin beneath the soot, the familiar shape of her jaw. "You," Croft breathed, taking a staggering step toward Cecily. "It's you, you little whore, you've been hiding here." Before Croft could take another step, Alistair moved with terrifying speed. He grabbed Croft by the lapels of his sodden coat and slammed him violently against the oak-panelled wall. The heavy thud rattled the crystal glasses on the sideboard. "Do not speak to her," Alistair snarled, his voice a vicious, feral growl that sent shivers down Cecily's spine. The mask of the Ice Duke was completely shattered, revealing a fiercely protective rage underneath. "Do not look at her. Do not even breathe the air in her presence. She is legally mine," Croft choked out, struggling against the Duke's iron grip. "I have the marriage contract." Alistair smiled, but it was a terrifying, hollow expression. The contract you kept in your solicitor's safe in Chancery Lane. My agents acquired it this morning when they seized your assets. You own nothing, Reginald, not even your own life. Now you will walk out of my house, you will mount your horse, and you will ride to the nearest port. I have booked you passage on a cargo ship bound for the penal colonies in Australia. If you ever set foot on English soil again, I will not bother ruining you financially. I will simply kill you. Alistair threw Croft toward the heavy double doors. The Baron stumbled, falling to his knees before scrambling up. He cast one last terrified look at the Duke, then fled into the hallway, the heavy doors slamming shut behind him. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the howling wind outside and the crackle of the fire. Cecily's knees finally gave out. She collapsed onto the Persian rug, the silver tray clattering uselessly beside her. She buried her face in her hands, her body shaking, with violent, uncontrollable sobs. The adrenaline that had kept her alive for 5 weeks suddenly evaporated, leaving behind a profound, exhausting emptiness. He was gone. The monster was truly gone. Cecily. The name was spoken with incredible gentleness. It was the first time she had heard her true name in over a month. She felt a warm, strong hand on her shoulder. Alistair knelt beside her on the rug, entirely unconcerned with the creases it might leave in his tailored trousers. He is gone, Alistair murmured, his thumb gently stroking the curve of her spine through the coarse wool of her grey dress. You are perfectly safe. I give you my word as a gentleman, you will never see that creature again. Cecily lowered her hands, looking up at the Duke through wet, crying lashes. The cold, calculating aristocrat who had tormented her in the library was gone. In his place was a man looking at her with a depth of raw, unvarnished emotion that stole the breath from her lungs. You knew, she whispered, her voice cracking. You knew the entire time. Why? Why did you make me scrub your floors? Why did you play those cruel games in the library? Alistair sighed, a heavy, weary sound. He shifted, sitting fully on the floor beside her. I did not know at first. When you arrived at my kitchen doors, begging for a position, I was in London. I did not return until your 3rd week here. That day in the courtyard when you were carrying the coal, I recognized your eyes. I would recognize them anywhere. Cecily wiped her dirty cheek, deeply confused. But we have never formally met, Your Grace. My father would never introduce me to a man of your standing. He feared you. Your father is a fool, Alistair said dismissively. He reached into his breast pocket again and pulled out a folded, slightly crumpled piece of heavy parchment. It was the marriage contract Croft had bragged about, the document that had signed her life away. Alistair held it up. Do you remember the grand and royal masquerade ball at Chatsworth House? Last spring. Cecily blinked her mind, flashing back to a time of silk masks and waltzes. Yes, I slipped away from my chaperone to hide in the hedge maze. I was overwhelmed. You were crying, Alistair corrected softly. You were sitting on a stone bench, crying over a crushed corsage because a clumsy lord had stepped on it. A gentleman in a black mask sat beside you. He did not ask your name. He simply offered you a pristine white rose from the garden and discussed the tragic poetry of Charles Baudelaire with you for an hour until your chaperone found you. Cecily stared at him, her lips parted in shock. That was truly only you. I have loved you since that beautiful night. Cecily, or Alistair, confessed, the absolute sincerity in his eyes pinning her. I searched for you many months. By the time I discovered you were the young daughter of the Earl, your father had signed this contract with Croft. I tried to buy it, but Croft refused out of spite. When I heard you vanished, I nearly tore London apart looking. He reached out his hand, gently cupping her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "When I realized you were hiding in my scullery, my first instinct was to pull you out, clothe you in beautiful silk, and declare you to the whole world. But you were so terrified. You flinched at shadows. If I revealed your identity, your father could have claimed you legally and handed you straight back to Croft. I needed time. I needed to legally obliterate the Baron, strip his wealth entirely, and seize this contract, so no man could ever hold a claim over you again. And the library," she whispered, her heart hammering wildly. Alistair smiled gently, a stunning expression. "I am extremely selfish, Cecily. Having you there watching your brilliant mind slip through the cracks of your disguise was the only way I could be near you." He held the paper over the fireplace. The edges burned quickly, reducing the chains that bound her into fragile ash. He dropped it into the roaring hearth. "It is done," Alistair said quietly. "You are completely free. You may return to London. I will give you a fortune, a beautiful townhouse, and a staff. You will never have to scrub another floor." Cecily looked at the ashes, then at him. He had protected her completely. "I do not want London," Cecily said softly. She reached out, placing her calloused hands boldly on his strong chest. "Though I must say, I resign as your maid. The master is too demanding." Alistair gasped softly. "The master is at your absolute mercy." He pulled her close, kissing her deeply. Highcliffe Manor truly felt like a real home. He would never, ever let her go away from him. If you were absolutely captivated by Lady Cecily's daring escape and the Ice Duke's brilliant, ruthless devotion, make sure to hit that like button right now. Share this thrilling historical romance with your friends who love plot twists, secret identities, and heart-stopping love stories. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our epic romantic dramas. Drop a comment below. Would you have recognized Cecily? See you next time.